In the name of God, welcome again to another episode of The Fact, the series that discusses international issues. Today we're going to discuss about the role of USA in different coups in different countries within last 10 years. As you know, we have witnessed so many different coups in different countries, especially in Africa, Latin America, and also Middle East. And today I would like to discuss this subject with two of our respected guests, Mr. Shabbir Hassanali from England and also Mr. Salaam from Japan. So now I will be at your service as your host. So I would like to welcome both of you. It is a true honor to have both of you in this program. I would like to start with Mr. Shabbir Hassanali with the first question. Which countries have been dealing with coups which actually also witnessed involvement of USA in these last 10 years?
First of all, thank you for having me, and also happy Ramadan to all the Muslims. In answer to your question, I think America has been involved pretty much everywhere in the world, even within its allies, even within England and Canada and other countries, though in a touch more covert manner. America is a very paranoid entity, and it needs to orchestrate coups, work with friendly members of any government of any country that are willing to, if you like, bend the knee and be subservient to the empire. So really, one could argue that America is involved everywhere, even somewhere as benign as England, for example. Our current Tory government is completely subservient to Washington. I mean, Theresa May does nothing without bowing down completely to the empire. And in fact, if you look at our situation over here, this Brexit problem that we have, this Brexit issue is actually very favorable to America and to Israel. So really, America has been involved everywhere where its interests are threatened, or the Israeli interests are threatened, which are one and the same, more or less. We know about the countries in South America. We know it's tried to do things in Cuba. We know it's trying to do stuff in Venezuela, and it will fail in Cuba and Venezuela. We know it had success in Ukraine, where it attempted to create problems for Russia and put in a puppet regime over there. We know it's tried to do this sort of thing in places like, for example, Egypt, when they ousted the popular government of President Morsi, which, while it might have had problems, was at least publicly voted in, for the most part, by the people of Egypt. And America didn't like it. Hillary Clinton, Obama, Mr. Trump, they didn't like it, so they came along and created a scenario where you have this this general that was actually appointed by Morsi, who stepped in and was given great power, and all of this. All of this is to support and help the Zionist entity. And so really, it's very difficult to say which. I think the better question would be which countries has America not been involved in attempting to try a coup. We know it tried to do stuff in Iran back in many years, and almost every second it's trying to circumvent and give problems to Iran. Alhamdulillah, so far it's failed, and it will continue to fail, because as we know, Imam Khomeini, Qaddas Sirruhu Sharif, had said that America can't do a thing. He'd said it more emphatically, but he'd said America can't do anything. It can't do anything, and that's the reality of it. What we have to understand about America is, like I said at the beginning, it's a very terrified little entity. It's an infant. It's barely out of nappies in the whole scheme of things. And it wants to play with the big guys. It wants to go against Syria. It wants to go against Iran, against Russia, against even Europe. And America is still an infant. It's a country of settlers. It's a country built on blood and theft. I mean, you just need to ask the natives of America. And the same problem, of course, exists in New Zealand and in Australia and most countries of the world where the Europeans went and colonized. America is a country without any real culture. It's got a subculture which is pushed out through Hollywood, and this is also another means of creating a coup, because a coup is not just a military action where the military come along and start shooting and impose someone in power. There is a psychological coup that's happening, and that's what they're actually trying in Iran very heavily. They're trying to create a psychological coup where the mindset of the population changes in favor of America and against the government that is actually working for its benefit. So really, America has been involved everywhere. There is, I don't believe there is a country anywhere, including its so-called allies, like so-called Israel, like Canada. They have also been affected because America wants people that work with it, that are friendly to it, that follow its guidelines. If tomorrow we were to get someone in so-called Israel who decided that they actually want to make peace, and not on the terms of America, not on the terms of this deal of the century and all of this, that person would never be voted in, even though, of course, we know that there is no two-state solution. This is like a dead duck. But anyone who goes against the idea and is not following the Netanyahu pathway, then this person will never be elected in. And we've seen this in the elections now. Netanyahu, with all the corruption and everything on him, he still manages to win the election. It's like ridiculous. So America, to give you a very short answer, which I know I've been very verbose in, has been involved everywhere across the globe.
Well, you perfectly mentioned how how actually USA were somehow, involved in different interventions in different countries, including Iran, Libya, and also other countries. But we also have the example of Honduras, which I guess in 2009 we witnessed some kind of coup in this country, and I would like to ask Mr. Salaam about the involvement of USA in that coup in that country, and the outcomes of such an intervention.
First of all, I would like to begin in the name of God, the most merciful and the most compassionate, and Ramadan Kareem to both of you and to all the Muslims around the world. Indeed, the situation in Honduras was 100%, more than 100%, in fact, orchestrated by the U.S. as well as Israel. In fact, I had heard, someone told me, and then they saw this from a Israeli website, so you or one of these Israeli/Jewish websites like Ynet or something like that. You can go, for example, and research this yourself just to verify, just to make sure that I'm not just spreading a rumor. But the outgoing or forcibly ousted President Zelaya said that he was taken out of the building, the governmental building, by Israeli Mossad agents. But the main orchestrator of this whole thing was none other than Hillary Clinton herself. And now we see a big migrant crisis. We see murdering of Honduran anti-establishment activists and people who generally work for the people of Honduras being targeted, harassed, or assassinated in the wake of this 2009 catastrophe. And this is all by design. This is not anything that's just happening by America's foolishness, or they're not wanting to learn from the lessons of history. They do this on purpose. They do this. They know they're going to get a migrant crisis later on, and they use these migrant crises as a means of causing a clash of civilizations, for which they control both the left wing and the right wing. The right wing response being the anti-immigrant hatred, and then the left wing response being, yay, mass migration is a good thing, let's all celebrate mass migration, and not care about the actual causes that created it in the first place. So it's definitely a big disaster, but as I mentioned, all intentionally by design.
Brother Shabbir, another example that we have concerning these kind of coups is the event of Ukraine, and as you know, it has also significant effects on Western and Eastern countries. So I would like to know about the role and the way that actually USA tried to contribute to this coup or chaos in Ukraine.
We know Ukraine is on the border with what is known as Western Europe, and of course this is all connected to NATO, of which America is a key component. And America felt that it didn't want a Russian allied government in the Ukraine, because Ukraine is strategically located. It has the Crimean Peninsula, which is a part of Russia, and on top of that, the population of Ukraine is actually very close to Russia in terms of their culture, their ideology, their religion even. And America needed to have that removed, so they got this clown to come along, and I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce these names, so please forgive me on that. They had people brought in, if you like, people who how do I put this politely? People who they favored, and they assisted them. They assisted them with the Western media to create the scenario. They assisted them by placing NATO missiles closer and closer to the border, by making lots of noise in the UN Security Council, within NATO, within the EU even. And so Russia said, fair enough, the people have spoken, what can I say? And so that happened, and then very soon, around that same sort of time, you had the change of government, which was done in I suppose you could call it a pseudo-democratic fashion, but let's be brutally honest about democracy over here. Democracy is a farce. The whole idea of people voting requires that those people voting have true information, real information on what they're voting for. Classic example of seeing why democracy is itself broken, especially the Western variant of it, is this Brexit scenario again over here in the UK, where people were given a certain amount of information by proponents of Brexit, and they were somehow made to believe that this is true, because people are busy generally. They don't have the time to understand what's going on. I mean, people like us, yes, we keep an eye on geopolitics and all this stuff, but this is by far the exception and not the rule. Most people don't have the time. They're busy living their lives, especially when you have a society that is teetering on the edge of abject poverty. People are working 2, 3, 4 jobs to make ends meet, even in countries like the UK and other countries. And in Ukraine, of course, poverty is very, very high. Anyone who goes and analyzes the economics of the Ukraine, while it should be a very rich country, it's extremely badly managed for many reasons. And so the people are taken in by this idea of, following on from the whole Obama thing of like, yes, we can change and we can do this and, everything will be rosy and everything. And so the people get taken in and they take a bite out of that poisoned pie, if you like. And by the time they've realized that it's poisoned, it's a little bit too late. And the poison is already traveling through them. And this is how America operates. It doesn't necessarily need to go in and create military adventures. It's got a more powerful entity, which is the media. The media and global politics, because again, it comes back down to the farce of democracy. We think NATO, some people think NATO is a peacekeeping organization. It's designed to maintain law and order and peace and prevent any problems and fight against terrorism and this, that, and the other. The reality is NATO is itself a terrorist organization. Look at what it did in Libya. Look at what it did in Ukraine. Look at what it's doing in many, many parts of the world. Look at what it did in Syria. We just have to look at what it did in Syria. Look at the way NATO is operating regarding even the earthquakes in Iran. And, so Ukraine was a country that could have been very close to Russia. And I think ideologically the people are ultimately close to Russia, but it's been manipulated. And like I said, because people don't always have the energy or the time to understand the nuances of geopolitics, they go with what they feel is right. They go with what they think is right based on what's being told to them by the media. And so you have this coup happen in this, I believe it was the Orange Revolution, or some colored revolution, which seems to be this policy of America. And you had a pro-Western, pro-NATO person elected, in inverted commas. I use the term elected very loosely here. And then all of a sudden you start having a war where, you have the West saying that, oh, Russia's bringing tanks and battalions and tanks and this, that, and the other. And you have all of these stories, even the shooting down of the plane. Now, of course, it's been proven this was done by terrorists that were supported by the usurping government in Kiev. But this is how America operates, and this is the danger.
You actually said, explained perfectly about the issue. I would like also to have the, analysis of Brother Salaam about the, crisis of Ukraine.
So for me, this issue is actually a little bit personal, but of course that, shouldn't negate from the facts. The facts are the facts, no matter what my personal stake in it is. But so my ancestral background is coming from Kiev, from Ukraine. And so to understand this, you have to understand even the history of Ukraine. The modern state of Russia, or preceding the communist regime, the Christian Tsar system of Russia began actually in Kiev when Prince Vladimir took baptism as an Orthodox Christian. It started in Kiev, so really Kiev was known as the Kievan Rus, which was part of historical Russia, and the Christian kingdom, later to become an empire, would have its capital there before moving to Moscow. So it has a Russian and a Christian, Orthodox Christian history. And the Orthodox faith, compared to the other faiths, sects of Christianity, has been more wise, I should say, to international organized Jewish power than the other branches of Christianity, which has more capitulated to it. So, putting that in context, we have to understand some histories of Russia in particular. For example, it was Russia that helped to discover a particular manuscript that was discovered in the possession of certain powerful Russian Jews, and that was later to be published as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And the attempts to try to prove that as a forgery, as a forged document, has just been very circular and just, rife with the same ad hominems and logical fallacies that are being used against people who have legitimate academic criticisms of Zionism and organized Jewish power in general. So the communism came in as a way of kind of finally taking revenge against Christianity in Russia. In fact, the Orthodox Church is currently investigating the murder of the Romanov family as a potential Jewish ritual murder. And that is being, again, slandered as a blood libel by the Zionist media in the West. But, the majority, not all obviously, but a good number of people within the Bolshevik movement were Jewish supremacist Zionists who were racist against non-Jews and Christians and Muslims in particular. And that's why you saw so much oppression against Christians and Muslim and religion in general. Zionist neoconservatives in the various administrations, starting with the Reagan administration, but obviously going way back even into the FDR administration when Jewish Soviet agents had been in the White House. They all have a very similar ideology. In fact, the neoconservatives used to be Trotskyists, and Trotsky is the famous Bolshevik communist who was part of the early Soviet Union before he was kicked out by Stalin. So most of these neoconservatives used to be communists, which is not too unrelated. So the people who had their hand in Ukraine were particularly Robert Kagan and his wife Victoria Nuland. Now, Robert Kagan was part of the Project for the New American Century, which is a think tank that came out in the year 2000, was think tank in the 90s, but in the year 2000 they came out with a white paper saying that there needs to be a new Pearl Harbor exact quotes from their paper, that needs to strike America so that they can engage in these multiple theater wars across the world. And a year later, they got their Pearl Harbor in the false flag event of 9/11, which was orchestrated by the Israeli Mossad as well as elements of the United States intelligence services, which is itself was a coup. It was a policy coup within the United States. So that gave them the free rein to do everything. Now, one of the co-founder of the Project for the New American Century, Robert Kagan, came into the Clinton and then later the Kerry Secretary of State office, along with his wife. Now, his wife specifically went to Ukraine, started to give lectures in Ukraine, sponsored by Chevron. You could see some of her speeches that has the Chevron logo in the background. And then, obviously, we see Abu Daesh, John McCain. may he roast in Jahannam eternally, inshallah. Also went over there and gave some speeches about freedom. Similarly, how he went to Syria and mingled with those freedom fighters that later turned out to be ISIS. Just conveniently, as soon as John McCain left, then you see this whole color revolution break out. And this was done entirely to take Ukraine, as the brother Shabbir mentioned, out of the sphere of Russian influence. And they were quite successful. They had a whole big mess, chaos, violence, and everything going on. And then they installed a puppet government. One of the big oligarchs in Ukraine is a Zionist Jew, an Israeli citizen named Igor Kolomoisky. And he has been controlling most of the major politicians and the previous president, and the current president, who people think is just this independent comedian with no political experience. No, he's just as much a ruse as the previous president. And he controls a lot of the paramilitary groups, such as, I believe it's the Azov battalion. And ironically, they call themselves neo-Nazis. So it's the whole thing is a big mess, but it's meant to try to create war against Russia. And while Russia is not perfect as an entity, and it has a tipping of balance between nationalist elements and more internationalist Zionist elements, they're still viewed in the same way as they viewed the Christian Tsar, which is a thorn in the side of international Zionism, particularly with Orthodox Christianity being the only real sect in the Christian world that has not succumbed to the tidal wave of secularism, which is a branch of international Zionism as well as American imperialism. So.
Brought up different activities that USA has had in different countries, especially Ukraine. But also we witness footstep of USA in these recent coups, or in these recent chaos in Sudan and also Venezuela. So I'm wondering why Security Council or United Nations doesn't do anything against any intervention that USA is trying to achieve in these different countries, especially Venezuela and Sudan, which were the most recent ones. So, do you think United Nations or the Security Council cannot do anything, or they just avoid doing anything concerning this matter? I'm asking Brother Salaam if we can go ahead about this question very summarized, and then we will go to the last question.
Was made to be a kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing that puts on the face of peace and international relations and diplomacy and being an equal actor, but it's just a tool of to put on a smiley face to keep down nations that are resisting against the prevailing world order. We can, as His Eminence Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, may God prolong his life and increase his success in resisting against the Zionist regime and American hegemony in the region. he said that the UN is the entity that condemns both the victim and the killer, and that is not any kind of authentic organization that should be trusted with anything. So the UN is by design meant to be inept, and similar to, as we can see, many of these NGOs and human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, many of which are staffed by former American CIA and State Department officials, and even have, according to Haaretz, Amnesty International served as a front for the Israeli Mossad in the 1970s and probably still do today. We can see that they occasionally maybe issue some toothless reports that really don't do anything and don't change any policies, but they may criticize America and Israel just a little bit, just enough to make themselves seem like they're an impartial organization. But the majority of their work is spent against the Islamic Republic of Iran, against Hezbollah, against Ansar Allah, against Hamas, against the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, against people that are trying to stand up for their rights, and movements that are embedded in the people that are just defending themselves against the worst genocides and aggressions in history. They try to condemn both sides, especially within Palestine, but it's always seen as if they're doing something for Palestine or doing something for Venezuela. To be neutral, it's always, always, always on the side of America and Israel and the European Union. And it is important for people to not trust the UN, to not want to rely on the UN for any kind of solution, whether it be for Palestine or whether it be for anything else, or Iran, or the relieving of sanctions. It may be a necessary vessel for diplomats, for example, Dr. Jafari of Syria or Mr. Zarif from Iran, to kind of play in that field, but we should never be fooled entirely by it and rely on it for any kind of relief.
Thank you so much. Brother Shabbir, if one day the page were going to be flipped and we see that, some coup or military chaos happens in USA, what would be the reaction of the global community concerning this, chaos in USA? This, if imagine this situation, what would be the reaction of the people?
I think free people of the world will heave a huge sigh of relief that maybe something useful is going to happen and come out of this entity. But unfortunately, given the background that Brother Ali Salman just mentioned about the UN, about the EU, NATO, etc., all of these organizations and entities, including the human rights organizations that he rightly mentioned, such as Amnesty and HRW, these are all created as lines of defense for the empire. And their entire purpose is to prevent the fall of the empire, be it from outside or from inside. The only real way that I think America would change would genuinely be if the people of America became educated. And if they became educated and understood what America is actually doing in their name, then I think they will definitely heave a sigh of relief if there is a change of power and the White House is finally, called what it actually is, the house of doom, the house of death, the house where the planning of genocides takes place, and it's burnt to the ground. And the entire political system of America, which, see, this is where it gets very, very difficult, because of the tentacles of global Zionism and this globalist agenda that's coming out of Washington, being orchestrated out of Tel Aviv, and of course Riyadh, which is bankrolling it. It's very difficult to even hypothesize about this, because it's very difficult to in fact imagine that America would fall. Having said that, America, like the Zionists, is weaker than a spider's web. It looks very strong on the surface. And this is where the difficulty is. The perception of the entity known as America is that it is extremely powerful. There's so many nuclear weapons, it has so many guns, so many aircraft carriers, this, that, and the other. If any of the viewers want to go on YouTube and you just search for USA versus such and such country, you see all of these pseudo-analysts having videos about how strong the American military is compared to Iran or Russia or China or blah, blah, blah. And they all give the impression that America is extremely powerful. But America, by the same token, across the world, its policies are not actually liked very much. If you look at, and I'm not going to use Iran as an example, because of course Iran says death to America. The resistance, Hezbollah and other groups, they say death to America. Of course, this is death to the regime, to the governmental system, nothing to do with the people, because contrary to popular opinion, the people in America really have no say in who gets elected. The entire thing is a farcical joke. If anyone analyzes the American electoral system and then compares it to what Plato wanted as a republic, as a real democracy that was written out by Plato and by other scientists of the idea of democracy, the two are completely poles apart. There is no commonality. Excuse me. So if America did fall, I don't think it would be by means of a coup. I remember a few years ago I was speaking to one of our friends who was an ex-Marine, and he was telling me that post 9/11, a lot of the generals and all of this, they want to make a coup. They want to take out the government in America. And I remember saying that, well, look, it would be very nice if they're able to do that, but I'm not going to hold my breath, because I think it's more complicated than that. America is more than just a government. It's a psychology. It's a culture, or subculture, actually. The whole if you look at the current movies that are coming out in the cinema, you look at Avengers, Endgame, Infinity War, Captain Marvel, Captain America, this, that, and the other. There is a reason why these films are coming out and why they're making box office records by, selling millions and millions and billions of dollars worth of tickets. It's not a coincidence. This is the instilling of this culture in the psyche of your everyday person. Just go on YouTube and you'll see how much people make pointless, lengthy videos analyzing these fictional stories. Even Game of Thrones, same scenario. Sometimes I open up YouTube and my entire feed is idiots talking about Game of Thrones and why such and such is. I mean, it's a movie, it's a film, it's a TV program, it's fiction. There's no reality in it. If someone wrote a book, then they made a film about it. Why are you getting so hung up and carried away? Until this culture is changed, the American hegemony will continue. This is why one of the strongest, and Ayatollah Khamenei has mentioned this many times, the biggest aspect of any war is the psychological war, the soft war, the way we have to, as the Americans say, to win the hearts and minds. We have to educate the population of the world. It's not just our friends anymore that we need to educate. Of course, that's a priority. But we have to educate the people of the world, which is why one of the things that they're attacking is, for example, Press TV. Press TV was knocked off YouTube. In my opinion, it should never have been on YouTube. It should never have exclusively decided to put its content up on YouTube. And this is where I think we, as a resistance people, are failing. We are using the tools that the enemy has built. This is a mistake. We can build better tools. And it's, I've heard arguments from people saying that, oh, well, they've got so many users. Yes, but I remember when YouTube had 2 users, 1 user. They had no one. They built up because of the work of people like us, because we used to share our videos on YouTube with someone else and so on and so forth. We need to develop and work with our own people that have got a platform like this. And I know I can talk about, for example, Shia TV and others. There are platforms available. I'm currently working on a platform that is going to do the same thing as YouTube. Nothing different, just the same thing. You can upload a video. It's got verification, so there's nothing nasty in the video, nothing inflammatory or whatever. You upload it, use it, you share it with people. Khalas. There's nothing clever about it. It's not rocket science. What's clever is the way they make it the only place. When, searching the internet has become synonymous with Googling the internet, right? What the hell does Google even mean as a word? It's a nonsensical word, right? You want to search the internet? Fine. Find yourself a search engine. There are many. There's DuckDuckGo, there's Bing, there's Google, there's Ask Jeeves. There's so many, You can find your own technology, the more power you give to these American multinationals that are actually fronts for the NSA and for the CIA. I mean, Google and Facebook, we know these are fronts for, the CIA and NSA. We know how closely they were involved and are involved in the PRISM or whatever it's now called program. So, in order for America to face any sort of threat, these ideas need to be changed. I think if enough people are educated, then, and if an American government is to change radically, a revolution, a new revolution is to appear in America, I can say hand on heart with full certainty that every free person in the world will go down and prostrate to God saying, Alhamdulillah, something good has happened.
Thank you so very much. As we only have nearly 5 minutes, I would like also to have the opinion of Brother Salaam about the same question about USA. So yes, please go ahead.
So it's interesting that there is actually a movement in the U.S. to actually create a coup or a collapse that is actually good for the system. For example, we have someone like Donald Trump who serves the agenda quite well, but he has this isolationist streak that makes him a little uncontrollable. For example, unilaterally deciding to withdraw from Syria, but then obviously across American history, even if they're so evil, they're not evil enough, so they either get assassinated or they don't get their second term, or they get impeached or some kind of scandal happens. So the same thing we see with Trump. We have this movement, yes, impeach Trump, but what comes after him? I mean, how many people are thinking the United States Constitution legally says that the next person in line after Trump has to be the vice president? The vice president will be an even more robotic Zionist servant than Trump, because Mike Pence is a very hardcore evangelical Christian Armageddonist type person. Is very dangerous, but people aren't thinking about the consequences. So and then on the social level, we can see that they're also trying to create tensions between, for example, blacks and whites, and so on and so forth, to create all this kind of the destruction of America, but in a bad way that's bad for the American people, and it actually in a way protects the empire. So. Like Brother Shabbir said, there needs to be an awakening of the American people, and when they awaken, they won't put up with this, because this exists by the consent, by the complicity of Americans, and that's why they use the media, such as all the movies that Brother Shabbir mentioned, to keep people nice and just dulled down and everything like that, so as they don't do anything about it. And the last American president to really stand up against this in a genuine way, someone who I actually think was probably the only decent American president, was John F. Kennedy. And he caused Ben-Gurion, the president or prime minister of Israel at the time, to resign, because he was trying to get them to not go forward with their nuclear weapons program. And then his brains got blown out on national television. And then when LBJ got into office, then Israel got their nuclear weapons arsenal, which today is still undeclared and not part of the nuclear weapons proliferation treaty. So, the American people need to be awakened. I think there is an awakening process, but it's not translating into political change yet. But hopefully, to God, this will happen soon. But it can't just be a political awakening. It also has to be a spiritual awakening. As Malcolm X talked about very often, it's these vices, it's these sins, it's people who are addicted to their stomachs and their private parts, and just blindly following their worldly desires. It's very easy to control a person who does that. So until people grow closer to God and away from their materialistic desires, whether they're a Muslim or whether they're a Christian, it doesn't matter. America will not become an Islamic nation anytime soon, but as we see in the Holy Quran, there is an emphasis in Surah 5, Ayah 82, that Christians are the closest in affection to Muslims, and so that kind of alliance needs to be built by Islamic communities in a real sense, and not in the superficial, just take a photo, we're doing interfaith, superficial type thing. So if we really want to see America awaken, we have to not be fooled by the fake collapse of America that they themselves are orchestrating in order to get an outcome that they want, which is dividing and conquering the people so that the bankers in the Federal Reserve can just sit back and count their money and still control the finances of the American people, who are unfortunately riddled with poverty. So hopefully when the American people wake up, it will hopefully curtail the American empire, but the people of the world should not wait for that. We should participate in the soft war, but don't rely on any kind of American awakening. Hope for it, but not rely on it. Inshallah.
Perfect, inshallah. So now we have come to the end of this program of The Fact. I'm truly thankful to both of you, Mr. Shabbir and also Mr. Salaam. It was truly a great honor to have you on the program, and I hope that we can have you again on our next programs. For our listeners and viewers, you can also check out our previous programs on our channel on YouTube. And thank you everyone for your time. Goodbye.